Hello, my name is Alex Isles, and in today's episode, we're going to be looking at Æthelfrith the Twister. Welcome back. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at Æthelfrith Flexer, or Twister as it's translated into modern English. This is a Dark Age or early medieval warlord who is one of Ida's grandchildren. And Ida was the famous Northumbrian patriarch who's the head of the Idings, this amazing dynasty who basically shaped Northumbria right the way through from the 6th century right the way into the 8th century and formed a lot of the basis of the culture of Anglo-Saxon England. So I'm really going to enjoy sharing the history of them. And if you like the sound of that and the fact that we're going to be looking at this amazing warlord, Æthelfrith, today, why don't you already subscribe? And then we'll just go straight into it and have a look at that. So starting off, we have to go back to Ida. Ida is that Dark Age warlord who appears into the history books in 547 AD. He marries into possibly a local princess of the Binnic tribe, which is what would eventually become English Benicia. When he marries into that tribe, he then has legitimate sons, and then he has other consorts that produce him a total of 12 sons and 3 daughters. When he does that, we're going to focus on some of his sons. So after Ida's death, he's followed by his son Theodoric, and then after Theodoric, we have Æthelfrith. After Æthelfrith, we have Hussa, and we will talk about that in a little bit. So Æthelfrith is the father of Æthelfrith, and we have to look a wee bit at how Anglo-Saxon kingship worked. With Anglo-Saxon kingship, you have to imagine a wee bit like the Godfather or the Mafia. You've got the Don in the center. The Don is the powerful one who controls the whole scene, but he's got the family. And everyone in the family has a legitimate claim to be the next Don. But it's all about who has the most power to support him. And he'll become the next Don after the previous Don dies. So don't think of it like today, like modern kingship, where the firstborn child will become the next monarch. No, everyone has an equal claim, and they're all Æthelfings. When you have these Æthelfings, each one can succeed, but they just need enough powerful support. So when Ida dies, Theodoric takes over from him, and he's the one who's besieged at Lindisfarne, just up here by the British. And then when the British fall apart due to infighting, then that leads on to the the creation of more power for the Venetians, and they start expanding outwards. Then obviously Theodoric dies, and then Æthelfrith's father, Æthelfrith, then takes over. When Æthelfrith takes over, he rules for a while, but presumably he either dies or gets killed, and then his brother, Hussa, takes over. Now, when Hussa takes over, we have to presume that Æthelfrith leaves, because you have to think that this is actually a really dangerous position for a young Æthelfing to be in. The other guy, the guy who's king, so in this case Hussa, is looking at this and going, my nephew, well, if he gets enough support, he's going to rise up against me. So what's the best thing I could do? I can either banish him or I can kill him. And when if he's dead, he's no risk to me. So because of that, Æthelfrith makes a choice. And what he decides to do is straight away go, leave. This is in my opinion. We don't actually have any sources for this. I'm just trying to fit together the sources to try and work stuff out. And the reason why I think this is because we have the Battle of Catterick, or Catterick, as it's mentioned. Now, the Battle of Catterick is mentioned in a British poem called Why Gogodden, and the Gogodden poem is about the King of Edinburgh basically gathering a massive war band to go down and fight against the Anglians at Catterick. And when they're fighting against the Anglians at Catterick, he gathers together loads of people. So he finds dissolute Anglians, he finds dissolute Picts, he finds Britons, he finds all of these different people, gathers them into a large war band. They drink mead for a year, they form together as a war band, and then they go down on their horses to Catterick. And then when they go down to Catterick, bam, there's a massive battle there. And the Anglians triumph over them. And in the poem Why Gogodden, we see that it is a combined force of Venetians and Darians. Now, this is really interesting, because for some reason, what happens is that the Gogodden, who are up here, they don't attack Venetia. They go straight down to Daria, and Daria, Catterick, is in Darian lands. or in the land which we today would call Yorkshire. Now, for some reason, the king of the Gogodin does not see the Bernicians as a problem. So maybe Hussa has an allegiance or a positive relationship with the king of the Gogodin, but the Darians are a problem. Yet in the poem, we see mentioned that both Bernicians and Darians are at the battle. Now, this is really interesting for me because I wonder if Æthelfrith is actually down in the Darian kingdom already. And when he's already down in the Darian kingdom, maybe what the reason why he's down in the kingdom of Daria is because he's actually moved down here and he's married into the Darian royal line. Because we know that Æthelfrith marries a Darian princess called Akka. So when he marries into the dynasty there, he may have already been down here. So that's why we have Bernicians and Darians fighting at the Battle of Catterick. So this fight, it happens somewhere around the 590s, and they absolutely destroy the Gogodin force. And when they destroy the Gogodin force, we then know at the death of Hussa, what happens is that Æthelfrith becomes king of Bernicia. Now, when Æthelfrith becomes king, this then causes for the king of Dalmatia, right up here, to become nervous. And he forms a massive alliance of the Britons up in this area. So he forms an alliance of Picts, Britons, and also alongside this as well, we've got Alt-Clut, or the kingdom of Dumbarton, in this area, and it's likely he forms them together in a massive coalition. Now, historians think that this may have been caused because the Bernicians, from around about the 600s or after the Battle of Catterick, are then able to expand, and people put Æthelfrith's control of the kingdom of Bernicia from about 592, 593. So from that time, after the Battle of Catterick, he's got an experienced warband. He is more established. So he is able to push into what we now call Dumfries and Galloway, take over the area, and possibly also take over a much weakened Reged as well. When he does that, or maybe he's also able to dominate Reged because of the fact that they haven't got a powerful royal family after the death of Urin under the reign of Theodoric, previous king of the Bernicians. So because of this, the king of the Dalmatians, who is Aidan mac Garon, now feels threatened, and he builds this massive coalition. He comes down, and in 603, which is roughly what we think the date would have been, we have the Battle of Dagestan. And in the Battle of Dagestan, there is a crushing defeat by the Bernicians on the forces of the Dalmatians, on the forces of the Britons, and also some allied Picts, to the point where the Irish are unable to raise their hands against the Northumbrians for nearly another 100 years plus. So when you have that, because of this, we suddenly see that they have become tributary kingdoms. And when they become tributary kingdoms, this is a really interesting one as well, because the tribute mustn't have been so horrendous, because when Æthelfrith dies, his wife Akka actually goes and gets protection under the kingdom of Dalmatia. Now, there is a suggestion that her maternal grandfather could have been a Dalmatian king. So because of that, there may have been a kinship relationship there, or there is a possibility as well that Æthelfrith develops a strong reliance or relationship with them, which isn't so harsh to the point where they go to revolt against him. So it's a really interesting one right there. But nevertheless, all of this is now under Bernician control. When it's under Bernician control, we now see that Æthelfrith turns his eyes south, and he then focuses on Daria, and he takes over the kingdom of Daria. And in one of the sources, it says he ruled for 24 years, 12 years over the kingdom of Bernicia, 12 years over the kingdom of Daria, and in total for 24 years. Another source says that he ruled over Bernicia and then ruled for another 5 years over Daria. So it depends on how you do the dating or how you work out which chronicle you're referring to, Anglo-Saxon, Irish, or the various other sources as well. But we know that he becomes king of Daria. Now, when he becomes king of Daria, he either forces out or disposes of Akka's father, Ella. And then it may be that her brother, Edwin, is in the kingdom for a while as a sort of a friend or like an ally. But tensions between Æthelfrith and Edwin build, and Edwin has to flee. And we'll talk about Edwin in a later episode. But nevertheless, whatever's happening means that now something has occurred between the kings of Daria and also Æthelfrith. So maybe the kings of Deria actually start showing a little bit of concern. The son-in-law, Æthelfrith, is now controlling all of this territory over here, controls Reged, Bernicia, southern Scotland, what is today southern Scotland, and up into western part of Scotland. All of this is now under his dominion, either by direct control or vassalization. And now their kingdom is in the firing line. And so maybe Acca and Edwin start planning. So maybe Ella and Edwin are starting to plan an attack up on Æthelfrith, and he just does a preemptive strike. Or maybe it was all a part of his plan. He's married Acca, and he has now got a legitimization for him and his dynasty after him to go push down and take over Deria. Whichever way it is, it doesn't really matter, because he comes down and he manages to take over Deria, and he becomes king of both areas, and then is then able to put his control over to the kingdom of Elmet, which is this area here, what we today would understand as West Yorkshire and possibly the area around Leeds. So we've got that going on now. So Edwin then flees from Deria and goes as far as he can away to the kingdom of Gwynedd, where he is then adopted by the king of Gwynedd and is then a sort of stepbrother to the future king of Gwynedd, who is Cadwalla, and he'll come important later. So when we've got Edwin over here, he's living in Gwynedd, and he is possibly baptized by a grandson of Urin of Reged. And so when he's baptized by a grandson of Urin of Reged, he's baptized probably into Celtic Christianity. Now, when Edwin is living down here, Æthelfrith seems to still be threatened by him. We're not entirely sure why, but at some point in maybe the 610s, probably about 612 to 616, you can see right here, 616 on this map. I would put the earlier date of 612 or around that time instead. He comes down and there's the Battle of Chester. And at the Battle of Chester, what happens is Æthelfrith launches an assault on the kingdom of Powys and takes over the former Roman settlement of Derva. And when he takes over that area there are 1,200 monks from a local monastery who stand on a hillside and pray for Welsh victory against him. Æthelfrith is either superstitious of the Christianity or possibly just anyone praying against him is his enemy. And so he sends a division of his army across and they kill all 1,200 monks. And so he's known as this bloody and ferocious pagan ruler because of his assault down onto the monks there on the hillside. Whether or not it was just practical spiritual warfare in his mind or not is another matter entirely. From there, Edwin flees again from Gwynedd to Mercia, and then from Mercia to East Anglia, just down here, which is on the map. And we'll talk more about Edwin's life in a future episode. But when he finally flees down to the kingdom of East Anglia, this then causes for greater sort of tension between Æthelfrith and the king of East Anglia, King Ragwald. And so he sends requests that what will happen is that Edwin will be murdered, and he's going to pay a large sum of money to the King Ragwald for doing it. Ragwald isn't too keen, and then what happens is that Æthelfrith starts putting more and more pressure on him, and Ragwald is going to capitulate. He's going to hand over Edwin and kill him for Æthelfrith. But Ragwald's wife intervenes, and she goes, no, this is dishonorable. This is not right. He's a guest in your court. You cannot do this. So because of this, Ragwald turns around and he turns to Edwin and he makes a deal. And when they make a deal, they decide that they'll go to war against Æthelfrith. And they make an alliance. And in 616, there is the Battle of the River Edel. And Æthelfrith is ambushed, overwhelmed, and killed in battle. And when he's killed by King Ragwald, he is then overtaken, and Ragwald and Edwin make a deal. Northern Britain is Edwin's. Edwin gets all of this. And he takes over Elmet, and he also takes over Lindsey, which is this kingdom just down here. And so Lindsey, Elmet, and all of this come under the Northumbrians' control. But Ragwald gets the south, and then he gets to presume his control over the other kingdoms just down to the south of there. And Ragwald becomes Bretwald, or High King, over the southern English, whereas the northern English and other tribes up here become under Edwin's control, and they sort of split England into two. Now, when we go back to Æthelfrith, he's an amazingly interesting character because with his wife Acca, they have 8 children, 2 of which follow on from him to become kings of Northumbria as well. That's Oswald and Oswiu. But alongside this as well, he also has a first son who was possibly born by his first wife, who I haven't mentioned yet, Beba. Now, Beba is where we actually get the name for Bamborough, or Bamborough Castle, just over here, because it says he takes Dyn Gwynedd and he renames after his wife, and she seems to be a British princess. So she seems to be a consort, or it's possible that Æthelfrith follows in his father's footsteps, and he has a princess in Bernicia and a princess in Deria, and he's just married twice. We don't really know, but we only know that Æthelfrith has one child with Beba, and then he has 8 children with Akka. So it could be that Beba maybe and him had a relationship when he was in his early teens, before he's forced out of Bernicia, and so because of that, it's then his marriage and his relationship down here in Deria that's the more important one. But that produces a son, Æthelfrith. Æthelfrith, he actually flees up to the Picts and he marries the daughter of the king of Picts. Now, when he marries the daughter of the king of Picts, they have a son, Talaran. Now, when they have Talaran, he then becomes king of Picts later and is actually a vassal of Oswy, who obviously would follow on from Oswald as king of Northumbria. But Æthelfrith also has a daughter, and she marries into the Strathclyde Britons, and would then have a son, Bredon mac Bray, who would be the Pictish king who would fight against Ecgfrith, Oswy's son, and then kill him in the Highlands, and therefore leading to the end of Northumbrian dominance. So it's really interesting to see that Æthelfrith, not only as like the Northumbrian warlord who creates the kingdom of Northumbria, but he also, through his first son, Æthelfrith, becomes the father of the Pictish royal line, with 2 kings of Pictland coming from his descent. So it's amazing to see in this early medieval period, we don't just have Northumbrian kings like Oswald and Oswy descended from Æthelfrith, but we also have Pictish kings as well, descended from the same warlord. And those Pictish kings, who we would have seen as today, maybe within the lens of, Scottish pride or Scottish things like that, they had blood of Ida, who is this sort of early medieval warlord running in their veins. And he is Germanic, and his wife may have been British. So when we're looking at this, we're seeing that the Picts had a king with Germanic blood in, and the Northumbrian kings have British blood in their veins. And so there's all of these really interesting mixings going on. So it's not just a battle between Anglo-Saxon, Briton, Welsh, Irish, Scots, as we may ethnically sort of simplify it to in our modern terms. But instead, it's a mixing where it's these warlords creating and crafting their kingdoms, which are proper fusions, proper melting pots of these different cultures and different genetic groups and cultural groups as well. So that's one of the things I love talking about, because Æthelfrith is not just the Northumbrian warlord, but he's also a father of the Pictish dynasty in some ways that would eventually maybe lead as a sort of domino effect to a very powerful Pictish kingdom as well. So there's some of my real passion there, where you can see this guy with his 8 children by Akka of Deria and his 1 child by Beba, who also gives her name to Bamborough, results in Northumbrian and a Pictish dynasty, but also starts shaping the foundations of what we would recognize as England and Scotland today. So an amazing character. I really hope you've enjoyed this episode and you want to watch more. But as always, please do like and subscribe. Share the video with your friends. If you'd like to financially support me, I do have a Patreon as well, which you can see in the description below. And I also provide guided tours of the northeast of England. So if you'd like to come and learn more or see some of my other information, that's a great way of doing it. But in the meantime, stay safe and well, and I hope you'll join me for another video in the near future. Until then, though, thank you very much.